my name's Nïamh. I'm 23 years old, and this is our Ford Fairlane 500 1962 that we drag race in UK Nostalgia Superstock. We bought the car about a year ago now, just over a year, and we've done a lot of work to it since. And it's now drag raced from just a normal street car. So I got into cars from quite a young age because my granddad had owned a 1926 Alvis from 1963, so I grew up with that being in his garage all the time. It's completely different from what I'm into now, obviously, but I used to sit in it and, you know, have a go on the steering wheel. And then my parents were into Volkswagens as well when I got a bit older. So they had a 1965 Beetle and a 1972 bay window camper van as well. When I turned 17 and passed my test, all I wanted was a classic car. I didn't want a modern car, didn't want to drive any of that junk. So I bought a 1965 Morris Minor, which was terrible. Now looking back on it, it was really rusty. Then I met my boyfriend Jake, and that's how I got into hot rods and American cars. I'd never really had anything to do with them before that. That's what made me move from a Morris Minor to the American stuff. Bit of a change, but it's a bit more exciting for me. Before that, we had an Austin A55 Cambridge, which we'd done in sort of like a rally replica style. We really enjoyed it. We loved taking it out. It was so much fun, but we really wanted something that had a V8 in it to take out on the street, and we couldn't really afford something, you know, amazing that was finished or anything like that. We came across this car on Rods and Sods, and it was pretty cheap. It had a few things wrong with it, but it had a V8 in it, and that was the main thing for us. We just were desperate for a V8 car. And the Ford was nothing that we'd never even seen a 1962 Ford Fairlane, I don't think, before that. And it's not really anything exciting. It's not an exciting car, but it was a blank canvas for us. It was painted sort of matte black. It had a smashed rear screen, but it was something that we could put our stamp on as well. And so that's why we bought this. It was a good place to start. When we first got it, it was solid enough. It had a little bit of rot on one of the rear arches, which we had cut out, welded. It had smashed rear screen, but it was solid underneath, and it was a really good start. The car was from New Mexico originally, so it was kind of a dry state car. I think it was in California after that. It was in pretty good nick. It had been in the UK for about 10 years at that point, so the rain hadn't got to it too much. It was still fairly solid. So it needed a few bits doing to it, but it wasn't like a full rebuild or anything like that. It was, you know, a good starting point for us. We're not incredibly technical, but we did most of it ourselves, so it was a fairly easy job-ish. When we got the car, it had the 289 cubic inch V8 in it. We were actually told it was a 302. When we took the engine out, I decoded the block, and we found out it was actually a 289. That wasn't necessarily a worse engine. In fact, it's probably better because they're a bit more revvy. But we took that out and we bought a 302 that we were going to put in it. Then there was a lot that had to be done to the other 302. We found out it wasn't going to fit. There was a lot of drama with that. So we ended up putting the 289 back in it. The 289 needed like a full rebuild basically. So we took it back down to the block. The block was already in a good place. It had been bored. But we put a Y-and dual plane inlet on it, alley heads. We put a second-hand street strip cam, I think it was crane cam. It's got a 750 Brawler double pumper carb on it. So we did a few bits to the engine, and now it's quite a reliable engine. So other than that, we've also put a new gearbox in it. It's a 4-speed anyway. The old gearbox was jumping out of gear. It just wasn't, it was a bit knackered, to be honest. So we put a top loader in, which is a bit of a stronger gearbox, and now it's perfect. On the outside, we did some bodywork to it, did a bit of welding, painted this black, gloss black, because before it was just matte black. The roof was already grey, but we polished it, and it looks so much better than when we first got it. And then we've also had it traditionally sign written by a guy called Craig Ainge. He's amazing. So we wanted to do it like early junior stock factory dealer sponsored style, so that's what we had done to it. Changed the wheels, things like that, but not done anything with the chrome work really, just polished it up a bit. So the interior we've not really touched. It had a bench seat in it to begin with, the original bench seat, but it was knackered. It was kind of falling on the driver's side. there was a big hole and it had been masking taped over. So we put some second-hand seats out of a classic, we think it was out of a Triumph, but they were cheap on eBay and local. So we put them in their sort of like 60s bucket style seats, and they go quite well with the interior of the car. It's not got headlining in, and that was going to be one of my next plans, to put headlining in, and the door cards are a bit knackered. It's still got a rear bench seat in, and then we just carpet lined the floor, and other than that it's not got a pretty interior or anything really to look at, so it just works. It's a drag car, so it doesn't need much more than that. We built this for drag racing. Obviously Jake drag races his Dodge Dart at the minute as well. I'd never raced before, I just crewed for Jake, and we just wanted a car for me to try drag racing in. It was just going to be a bit of a street strip car. It wasn't meant to be anything leery, it wasn't going to blow the doors off of other cars or anything like that. It was just for me to have a go at drag racing. So we raced this in Nostalgia Superstock, which is the class that Jay races in as well. So it was mainly just for me to have a go at that, but it's also a really good cruiser just for cruising around town. We've cruised, we've gone on holiday in it, so it's got a really good balance of both street and strip. I think our biggest achievement was probably just getting it ready. We took it off the road in about October last year, so about a year ago. It sat for ages just because we didn't know what we were doing with the engine. We needed to take a break because it was stressing us out, and we didn't even want to look at it. And then we had a mad dash at the beginning of the year to get it ready for one of our drag racing events. It was the first weekend with the class, and that was back in June. And it was a crazy, crazy dash to get it ready. So we finished the car 2 days before the first event, and I had not driven it since the winter beforehand. So I drove it down to the strip, raced it, drove it back, and it was perfect. We didn't expect it to even run as quick as it did. We were pretty happy with that for a first time out. Well, pretty stressful. Part of building it was just the fact that the engine choice changed that many times. We were actually going to call the car Plan E because we'd gone through Plan A, B, C, D, E before we ended up rebuilding the 289 and putting that back in. We bought the other engine, realised that nothing fitted. It was going to be so much work to get it in, ordered a bell housing from the States, flywheel was different, this was different. It was just a nightmare. So it was really stressful at the time, but now we look back on it and we tell everyone the story and how stressful it is, and we'll never own another Ford, and it was horrible. We hated every moment, but actually it was kind of fun doing it, and it was a nice learning experience. So yeah, that was funny now we look back at it. But throughout this summer, we've taken it everywhere. We've gone to shows in it, we do the shopping in it, we go out for cruises in the Peak District in it, we've gone down to Devon from Sheffield in it. We try and drive it anytime there was a nice day. And people love it. It's a bit outrageous because it's so loud and you see people's heads turning and they think, what on earth is that? But people like to come up and ask questions about it, which is really fun to have people, be interested in it. And again, we can tell them the ridiculous story of how we built it and everything. So it is a real laugh to drive, and we've loved driving it everywhere throughout summer. It's a bit like a boat because it's actually a small American car compared to other American cars, but it's still a lot bigger than, your Yaris's or whatever else. The steering is sort of wallowy and you've got to take it really easy around corners. If it's wet, you just need to take it real steady because it wants to spit you into a ditch. But it's a lot of fun to drive. Obviously the steering is really heavy, but because it's a manual, there's nothing more fun than driving a manual V8 car. It just makes you drive a bit crazy. But it's so much fun to drive. Like the amount of times I've taken it down, a carriageway or whatever, and you give it a bit of spanking, and you can't help but smile because the experience is so fun. Like the manual is just, it makes for such a good drive in it. best it's done on the drag strip so far is a 14.9 second run, and that was at 96 miles an hour. It probably could go faster now that we've sorted some issues with it, but we're not quite sure what it would do. It could definitely do over 100 if you were, you know, on a bit of a longer track, but obviously it's only a quarter of a mile, so we only know what it can do in a quarter of a mile. So that's the best we've done so far. Car is actually for sale now. We've had our fun with it, and we've got our eyes on another drag car. If I was to keep it, I'd probably just try and get a bit of a better time out of it, do some on the interior, because as I say, it's not much to look at. I wanted to drag race obviously since I met Jake and started crewing for him. It's been really exciting to, you know, do it all winter. When we were building it, I just couldn't wait to race it. It was, you know, all building up to that moment. When I actually did it for the first time, I wasn't stressed or anything. It was just exciting. I just want to get on the track, want to get the car done. Everyone's had really positive reactions to the car and to me doing it. They all were couldn't believe that I was going to have a go. Luckily, being a woman, it's a really even playing field. You know, there's no advantage or disadvantage of being a woman in any kind of motorsport, actually. It's not like other sports. So everyone's so accepting, and they actually love when women are drag racing. I think it's something quite cool to see, especially with it being a manual. Everyone's like, oh, you're racing a manual, that's very cool. So it's just been a really exciting experience, and I can't wait to race the new car as well, which is top secret for now. But I'm very excited to racing that, looking forward to racing that as well. So it's been a really good experience. I've got a real interest in women in motorsport and the car scene in general. I do some writing myself, and I'm really interested in women who were racers in the 60s, and they were real pioneers. You know, they had to fight to get their NHRA licenses. So I think we've already had the way paved for us decades ago. So I'm really thankful to those women. And now it's just a case of people in our generation sort of taking that over. I do think there's still a lot of stigma around women on the car scene. And I think a lot of men and also other women think you can't be a real car woman. You know, I think people judge you a lot for it and kind of try to pick holes in what you do. So myself, I try and get involved as much as I can. I'm still learning because my parents didn't, you know, they weren't as technical or anything, so I didn't learn as much off them. So I'm still learning myself, but I think being a woman in a car scene is really important because, you know, there's no advantage or disadvantage. We can do it just as well as men can. And you know, women's builds are just as good as men's builds. So I think it's really important for young girls to see that there are other women in the car scene and, you know, doing what they want to do in the future.